So you have 2 minutes to read this case study. So my first thoughts when reading this case study is that it's an unusually short case study. The next two that you'll see later on in the paper are much longer. So whether or not that's a typical practice for the examiner or not, I've not particularly noticed before, but it's certainly shorter than the standard case study. Now, I would always recommend highlighting those key points in the case study that you think potentially might come up later on in the questions. So when I was reading through this case study, the first thing that I thought of was, well, what is it exactly that she wants to set up? And so she wants to set up here a shop selling organic produce from the farm direct to local customers. So that's the unique bit about the business that she wants to set up. So I thought that was relevant. Then I thought clearly there's going to be a marketing question on this, because it talks about how she does not have a lot of money to spend on marketing for her shop. Just highlight that, spend. It then states how she is currently advertising. She advertises by delivering leaflets. And I'll put to local households. And then looking at the bottom bit, I don't think that's particularly going to be that relevant about the weekly delivery service, because I suspect that will come up as a question later anyway. There's nothing unique in there that I think I won't be able to get from the question. So really with that question, those are the only bits I'd really highlight, the only bits I think might be relevant for me to refer to later on in the exam paper. Now, always take the time to read the case study. I know 60 minutes, 60 marks, it's very pressurized business studies. Those of you who do computer science and ICT with me, I would love, I'm not going to pretend that you will have more time in those exams, particularly the ICT paper. Business studies paper, you will not have time. If you finish 10 minutes early in the business studies paper, something's gone wrong, because you should not be able to finish that quickly, because I couldn't. So you will be pushed against it, but take the time to read the case study. It's worth that time. Take the time to read the case study. Okay, so let's have a go at the first question then. As I say, you can just make notes as I go through these. So the first question says, explain, there's our trigger word. So I'm going to highlight that. You don't have to do that in your exam paper, but for today, I think it's helpful. So explain. So it's not a state question, it's an explain. So it's expecting some development. Explain one possible business objective that would be suitable for a startup business like Jenna's. So we're talking about a business objective that's relevant to her particular type of business, which is a startup business. And we can see there that it's worth 2 marks. That's worth noting, because it means I can't just state the answer. I need to develop it to get that second mark. So when I think of a startup business, I always think the number one objective of any startup business is to survive. And in writing that, I've now achieved my first mark. So now I've got to develop this answer to get that second mark. So why do I think survive? I think survive because most businesses go bankrupt in their first year. And there's my development. I've said survive, and I've identified the reason for that being that she's a startup business, and that in the first year, you're more likely to go under in that first year than any other year. And that's it. I don't need to write more. I've got my 2 marks, time to move on. Sometimes some students at the top end, in the top band, over answer questions. 2 marks to survive, 1 mark, as most businesses go bankrupt in the first year, 2nd mark. I'm going to move on. So the second question says, explain one advantage and one disadvantage to Jenna of using leaflets to advertise her business. Now with this one, I think it's worth going back to the case study just to see where that was discussed, because it was discussed obviously in the middle paragraph. So it says Jenna does not have a lot of money to spend on marketing for her shop. She advertises by delivering leaflets to local households. So let's go back to the question, having reminded ourselves of the context. Explain one advantage and one disadvantage to Jenna of using leaflets to advertise her business. So we've got here an explain question again. There's my trigger word. So let's just highlight my trigger word. We can see it's 4 marks, and it's an advantage and a disadvantage. So it's 2 by 2. It's essentially an advantage well explained gets me 2 marks. A disadvantage well explained gets me another 2 marks. So my advantage of using leaflets. Well, leaflets are obviously cheap to distribute. It doesn't cost a lot of money to drive around in a van and just drop them through a door. You could probably get through, I don't know, in an hour, you could probably do 200 houses. So they're cheap to distribute. So my first advantage is cheap to distribute. Apologies for being left-handed. Cheap to distribute. Okay, so now I've got to develop that. And my development of that is based on the case study, which says that she does not have a lot of money to spend on advertising. So I'm going to put cheap to distribute, which is good because she does not have a lot of money to advertise. And there's my 2nd mark. I've given a reason or an advantage, cheap to distribute. I then stated why that's important for her and why that's an advantage, and that's because she doesn't have much money to spend on advertising. Okay, time to move on. Don't need to over answer. Okay, so the disadvantage now. Okay, so the disadvantage of these leaflets, to my mind, and my initial thought when I was looking at this question was, I don't know about you, but when I get something like that through the door, I consider it junk and I just put it straight in the bin. I don't even bother looking. So I would write disadvantage, seen as junk mail. There's my 1st mark. And so people often don't even bother reading, but just throw away. And there's my 2nd mark. So I've said junk. If you just wrote junk mail, that's your 1 mark. And so people often don't even bother, and so people often don't even. So there's a mistake by me. I didn't write don't even bother reading, but just throw away. I forgot the word there. And that's my 2nd mark. And that's that question done. I'm going to give you just 30 seconds just to make any further notes. Okay, so we're going to turn over. Now, this is a good example of the maths question you will get in your exam paper. You will get a maths question in the exam paper, that's guaranteed, and you are allowed to bring a calculator in to your business studies exam. and I'll be reminding students of that as you come into the exam hall in May. However, it's worth just pointing out here in advance that this question here probably didn't require a calculator. This is by far the most simple of the maths questions I've ever seen. So please don't take this question as oh, I don't need to bring a calculator because the maths is that easy. This is by far the simplest I've ever seen. So please make sure you do bring in your calculator. That said, I always think the maths questions are your gimme marks. If you don't get these marks, that's criminal. Okay, these are so easy questions. So let's look at this question. Jenna currently prices her bag of mixed vegetables at £1.50 and sells 60 bags per week. She is thinking of increasing her price to £2 per bag. Calculate Jenna's weekly revenue if she only sells 50 bags at the new price. So it says calculate, so I've got to show my workings. I've also got to show the final answer. I don't need to explain this or anything like that. So all I do is go 50 bags at the new price of £2. So that's times 2. This is the price per week. And you can see here, it's talking, the question's asking for weekly. So we can see that per week, weekly. So all I have to do is just calculate that, which is £100. Now notice, if I wrote 100, I'd only get one of the 2 marks. To get the second mark, I must have there the pound sign. And that's her weekly revenue if she sells 50 bags at the new price. Now, hopefully you can all very quickly see why I consider these to be the easiest questions in the paper. But you wouldn't have got 2 marks if you left off your working or you left off that pound sign. Both are critical. Okay, so we're going to move on. And we're now going to move on to a question that escalates in difficulty somewhat. Okay, because it now says, explain the possible effect on Jenna's business if she decides to increase the price of her mixed vegetables. Now, this is the first time that we've had a question where we've got the explain bit, but it's the first time where they've said specifically what's the impact on Jenna's business. So this is what we would call a context question. What I mean by that is that if your answer could be written or read about any business, then it's not in context. This question needs to be based on the context. And in fact, you can't get to the top end marks, which are 3 to 4, without context. I could show you the mark scheme. I won't. Just take my word for it. You can't get those 3 to 4 marks, i.e. the higher end of the band, if your answer is not in context. Notice again, it is 4 marks. So how would I go about answering this? Okay, so I would think about the fact that if she increases the price of mixed vegetables, she's going to potentially lose some customers because invariably they may not stay with her if she does increase her price. So I would start off by saying, if Jenna increases the price of her vegetables, she may lose customers elsewhere where they are sold for cheaper. So if Jenna increases the price of her vegetables, she may lose customers elsewhere where they are sold for cheaper. So that's my first point, because the fact is, if she does increase his price, she is potentially going to lose some of her customers, and they might go and buy their vegetables from elsewhere. Now we can see that this question here does have some context. It's not explicit, because if you think about it, you could just write phones there or burgers there. So it's not explicitly in context yet, but it certainly is there and a possible effect. So we want to go for these 3 to 4. So how can we get this really into the, at the moment it's kind of light in terms of being in context. How can we really get it within the context of the case study? Here's how we can start to develop that. However, if her prediction above of sales is accurate, and that is banging context now, because I'm talking now about her new prediction of sales up here based on her new price. So you cannot say that this is now not completely in context. So if her prediction above for sales is accurate, she will still increase her revenue by £10. Now, what do I mean? How have I got that from? Okay, if we go back to here, we can see that at the moment, if she sells 60 bags at £1.50, that's 90 quid a week. And yet she's calculating on her new price. Yes, she's going to get a reduction in the sales by 10 down to 50, but she's calculating that even despite that, she'll still be making £100 a week, which is obviously £10 more. So down here, yes, the possible effect is that she might lose some customers, but that's qualified by the fact that actually, if her prediction is accurate, she will still increase her revenue by £10. And I might just write here 100 minus 90, just to show the examiner where I plucked that figure from, so he doesn't think, or she doesn't think, that I've just sorry, it's 90 to 100. So my mistake, I should have written it the other way. A bit confusing otherwise. So it goes to 90 to 100 pounds. And that's just to show the examiner that I know what I'm referring to. And that there is now a question that does explain the possible effect on her business and is absolutely in context. And so that there would be a 4-mark response. Okay, I'm just going to give you 30 seconds to make any further notes that you need to. Okay, so we're going to turn over now. And we are now going to do our first of our 3 9-markers. Now, as you know, in your exam, you will have 3 9-mark questions. So 27 of the 60 marks for the exam paper will be calculated by the quality of your response to the 9-mark questions. So they really are very important. Now, I know that Mr. Guyan recommends a 3 argument for 1 drawback system. My students are used to a 2 argument for 1 drawback. Let me explain why I think that is. Obviously, it's up to you to decide. I just think that 3 arguments for, then a drawback, I think that's quite a lot to do within the 60 minutes. Now, if you're someone who can write very quickly and can process very quickly, then I think that's fine. And invariably, 3 arguments for and a drawback is probably going to be more evidence towards your decision. However, 2 arguments for and a drawback, well developed, I think it's sufficient evidence. And actually, I think it's easier because then you don't have as many points to discuss, and you're more likely to discuss the points that you have written. You're more likely to explain them in detail. So I recommend a 2 arguments for and a drawback. So let's have a look at the question then. It says, Jenna has to decide if she should offer the delivery service of a box of organic fruit and vegetables. In order to find out if this would be popular, she is considering whether to give out questionnaires in 2 villages near the farm shop or carry out some internet research. Recommend to Jenna the best way to obtain reliable market research. Give reasons for your recommendation. So the first thing you've got to do when you get a 9-mark question is make a choice. Make a decision. The worst thing you can do is go for an answer that says, well, I'll do a bit of both. That's going to be a bad exam answer. Make a firm decision. Even if in the real world you wouldn't do this, just for the benefit of your exam, make a decision and clearly go for one of the 2 options. I'm going to go for internet research. So what I would do is probably if I was you, sat in your exam, I'd make a quick note. And I'd do that, and then I'd quickly do a plus, plus, and a minus, which means what are going to be my arguments for, and what am I going to be my drawback. So my arguments for using the internet is that it will be cheaper than the questionnaires. So I'm just going to put that as a little note to myself. It's going to be cheaper to do the internet research. Giving out, producing the questionnaires, handing them out, having to then analyze those results, that's going to take some cost to do that. Whilst with the internet, could be a day surfing, potentially. Okay, another benefit is that it's quicker. Time is money is a classic kind of cheesy business saying, but it's true. Okay, so it's a quicker process. Having to produce those leaflets, take them, hand them out, get them back in, analyze them, that's going to take you time. Not just cost to produce them, but time as well. Okay, the drawbacks to the internet research, obviously, potentially, you have the danger of it not being relevant, because she's clearly operating in a very local market, and so the internet research may not be actually that relevant to her local market. Okay, so those are my that's my plan. That's my kind of very quick summarized plan of how I'm going to attack this question. So now I need to start answering the question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my plan that I've written in the top right corner, and I'm going to start off by making a clear decision. And I would always say this for your 9 markers, make a clear decision at the start of them. So I would recommend Jenna to use the internet as her market research. Okay, full stop. Now I've got to give that first argument. This is because it would not cost, forgot the not cost her very much to do this. And here's my development now. So that's my stated point, it's cheap, and here's the key bit, cost very much to do this, and the case study states she does not have very much money. Not have very much money as a startup. Now, it's just assumed with this type of question that it will be in context, okay? So you noticed here, this was the first question where they asked us to, what impact was it having on Jenna's business? All the 9 markers have to be in context, okay? I'm not going to make that explicitly clear, but it should be obvious to you that the 9 markers must be in context, okay? The whole point of the 9 markers is that you are responding to the case study. Okay, so that's my first point. I don't know, you could, I suppose, tick off as you do these, okay? I'm not going to do that, but you get the idea. Okay, so now I'm going to go for the second point, which is the speed of it. So I'm going to write, it would also be quicker, which is vital as a sole trader. There's their reference to the case study, as she is the only one working in the business and can't afford to spend huge amounts of time on research. So again, in context, I've identified the fact that she's a sole trader and that as a result, she's the only one working in the business, and obviously using the questionnaires would take her a lot of time, and that's time then she can't be used by actually running her business. So there's my two arguments for. So now I need my drawback. And my drawback was, of course, that I didn't think the research would necessarily be that relevant. So for this one, however, a drawback. So you can see here I'm also making explicitly clear where my arguments for and against are. So make it explicitly, like, you know, it's like signposting to the examiner. However, a drawback of internet research is that it may not be relevant for her specific local market. In context, because I mentioned the fact that she has a very local market, it just stated in the case study, and the fact that obviously the point is that the internet research might not be relevant. So that's now my two arguments and my drawback. Now this type of response up to this point here, apologies guys, computer's locked, inactivity. So the point that we're at to here now is essentially, if I just push that up a little bit, is that this answer now is a 7-mark answer. For us to get up to the top end, which as top end students you should be aspiring to, we now need that final evaluation where you critically weigh out, why do my arguments for outweigh my drawback? Now, this is by far and away the hardest thing to do, which is why so many students get stuck at 7 out of 9 marks, or maybe even 8 out of 9. To get to those very last couple of marks, last mark, you need to have that final evaluation where you weigh out, why do your arguments for outweigh your drawback? Why are these more persuasive than this? And there needs to be some kind of ultimate critical reasoning for that. So here's my attempt at doing this, okay? Listen carefully as I do this, and then I'll talk about it afterwards. Ultimately, the internet is the best option as, so here's my critical reasoning coming in now, as most businesses fail in their first year, and this option is cheap and quick, saving her time and money she doesn't have. So my critical reasoning is the fact that she's a first year business. And on the basis that she's a first year business, I would argue that her number one aim has to be to save time and money. And the internet facilitates that. There's my critical reasoning. So I've got my pros and my cons, but to get to those top end marks, you then need to weigh up overall, why do your points for outweigh your drawback? What critical reasoning have you got? Now, I see some students doing things like short-term versus long-term, so long-term benefits versus short-term costs. Whatever your critical reasoning is, in my case, it was the fact that she was a first-year business and that saving time and money had to be the priority. As I say, your top-end students, which is why I'm sharing this with you, I wouldn't necessarily share this with students who are aspiring for C's and D's, because ultimately it wouldn't necessarily be relevant for them. Okay, so this is not something that I would necessarily recommend other students wasting their time on in the exam, but you guys are students who are going for those top grades, and so you need to be aiming to have that final evaluative statement. Okay, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to make any further notes, and then we will move on. Okay, so We can now turn over 2 pages to case study B, which is Out and About Limited. And I'll give you a couple minutes to read that and highlight any key points that you think are relevant. I'm going to highlight it as you're doing it as well. Read the case study yourself, don't just highlight what I would highlight. Okay, so why have I highlighted what I've highlighted? Okay, firstly, LTD is a no-brainer. The fact that it's an LTD means that it's not a sole trader. It's not a partnership. It's not a public limited company. The fact that it's an LTD means it's private limited company, which means the shareholders, and there are shareholders in an LTD, will have limited liability. That's important information just to have, because it means that this is not a startup business. I mean, I know it tells us that there, but it just reaffirms that this is not a startup. So this is very different to the first case study. Okay, secondly, obviously I wanted to highlight what it does. So it's a small factory of 2 shops, and that it sells camping, hill walking produce all year round via mail order. Then I felt that the bit about the workers was clearly important, because I felt that it was going to come up later. So the fact that it has some workers on a part-time basis, and that they're popular with employees, and that they provide flexibility. And then finally, at the end there, the sales and profits are on the increase, and that they're looking now to further develop that by going online and trying to potentially wide, and the fact that they're looking for extra finance to fund that. So those are the points that I highlighted. So now we turn over and we have a look at the first question. Okay, so this is a state question. We can see that just there. And it's 2 marks, 2 points. So I don't need to develop either of these. I just need to write them. As long as they're accurate, then that's more than sufficient. So state 2 possible risks for Out and About if it decides to sell its products overseas. Okay, first risk then I would say is increased competition. Because obviously at the moment they're only competing with other UK-based firms. But if they go abroad and start selling into Germany or into France, they're going to have to compete against those German, French companies. So I'll put increased competition from foreign companies. And that's 1 mark. Okay, second mark, You could do things like, I suppose you could do things like exchange rates, etc. on this. I would go for overseas customers may have different tastes. And that's one of the biggest issues with trying to sell abroad is do you know that they're going to have the same demand for the products that people in the UK do? But there's a few different things you could do. You could do a language barrier. You could have done, say, exchange rates and the problems of that. You could do things like tariffs and import and export taxes. So all sorts of answers, but that's more than sufficient. Again, don't over answer these. 2 marks is 2 marks. State the point, move on. Okay, so let's move on then. So explain 2 sources of finance that would be suitable for Out and About Limited to fund their business. Okay, so the things that we've got here is an explain question again, but interestingly, 6 marks, not the 4 marks that we'd seen previously. Now, it says explain 2 sources of finance that would be suitable for Out and About Limited to fund its expansion overseas. There's nothing that's really particularly specific to Out and About Limited. So I would argue that with this, it's just basically saying what 2 sources of finance would be appropriate for a business if they were starting up selling abroad. And so actually with this type of question, we can probably surmise that we just need to state one advantage or one source of finance and then develop it with 2 specific points. So see how I go about doing this. So I'm going to state my source of finance. I'm then going to come up with 2 specific points that I feel will justify why that's an appropriate source of finance. So the first one I'm going to go for is bank loan. I think a bank loan in this scenario would be appropriate. So why a bank loan? So I'll put this would be good because you've got to justify this now. That's the whole point of this question. You've got to justify these sources of finance. Bank loan, this would be good because, here's my first point coming, it has a longer payback. And I'll put here, if agreed, which it should be. You don't have to pay it back very quickly like you do, for instance, an overdraft. So that's my first justification. My second reason for recommending a source loan, we need bank loan. We need to remember 3 marks for this one. So bank loan, this would be good because it has a longer payback, and in addition, can provide the advice that Out and About Ltd are seeking. Okay, now you might think, well, what's that? What's that talking about there? If you go to the case study, it says it will need to find some extra finance to fund this new idea, and is also looking for some advice about the decision to sell its products overseas. So the fact that they can get that advice from the bank loan is then my second justification for this bank loan answer. Okay, so then we move on. So now we're going to go for source 2. What's my second recommended source of finance? Now, I am basing this on the case study because the case study says they're an LTD who's been around for 3 years, and it says here sales and profits have been on the increase. So I'm going to go for retained profits as my second recommendation, on the basis that as an established business with rising profits, they would have the profits to do this. I think there's enough evidence there for me to justify that. So retained profits, and I'll start with saying profits have been increasing recently. Now there, I think, is my first mark. So, sorry, 1 mark, 2 marks, because now I'm establishing here why it is that I think this is doable, because their profits have been increasing recently, meaning they will have sufficient funds to fund the website internally. That means within the business. So my first mark, retain profits. Second mark, profits have been increasing recently, meaning they will have sufficient funds to fund the website internally. Essentially, they've got the money to do it. So where am I going to get my third point from? Well, if they're funding it themselves, that means they don't have to pay any interest. So that's my third point. This is good because no interest will have to be paid. And there's my third point, no interest. So 1 mark, 2 mark, 3 mark. And this one really is just what I call using a connective, because therefore this means that this is good because, so it's really just a follow-up from this point here. Because this point here is, I've got the funds, this point here, so I don't have to pay interest on them. Okay, so we move on. Okay, so once again, look for the trigger word. You'll see that in business studies it's generally state, explain, or a 9 marker, which I suppose is quite easy in comparison to some other courses. So explain how Out and About Limited could use its new website to help improve its customer service. So we're looking here at 4 marks. Now, this question is clearly a context question. Explain how Out and About Limited could use its news website to help improve its customer service. So to get to the top marks, I must answer in context. Okay, so first and foremost, I'm going to draw a comparison here between what they currently do to what I think they should be doing, or the benefits for this. You'll see what I mean in a second. So I'm going to start by saying Out and About Limited currently sells its products all year round through a limited distribution catalogue. Okay, let's go back to the case study just to prove that, just so you see I don't make stuff up. So we go back to here, you can see here it says it also sells products all year round by mail order through its catalogue. Okay, so we can see that point that I've now raised is from the case study. So this is now going to be where I base now my answer on. So at the moment, they're selling all year round through a limited distribution catalogue. So now I'm going to explain how the new website will improve customer service. The website will allow online sales, which will facilitate international custom. So we're getting close to now to this whole answer of improving its customer service, but also convenient 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week purchasing in a manner most customers are now used to. Most people are used to e-commerce. So let's just unpack that answer. Let's just unpack what I've written there. So Out and About Limited currently sell its products all year round through a limited distribution catalogue. Bang, I'm in context. You cannot say that this answer now is not in context, as I've clearly identified what they're currently doing. And I only got that from the case study. The website will allow online sales, which will facilitate international custom. Well, that's one That's one reason for how they'd improve customer service, the fact that they would now be able to sell to more people. That's an improvement of customer service. But also another reason why it would be improved is they would now be allowed allow 24/7 purchasing, which obviously previously they would not have had. They would not have been able to process an order through a catalogue until 9 o'clock in the morning. They would be reliant on postal services. This is obviously convenient for most customers as they are used to it. And most customers are not used to. Sorry, that's a mistake. Are now used to. So there's my answer in context about how the website will improve customer service. International custom, 24/7 purchasing. Okay, so we're going to move on. I'm just going to give you 20 seconds to make any further notes that you need to on that one, because I think that one I went about it in maybe a bit of a roundabout way. Okay, so now our second 9 marker. Same process. I'm going to make a decision. I'm going to write my plus, plus, minus here. So let's just read it first. Out and About Limited expects that its new website will increase its sales. To cope with this rise in demand, it will have to recruit some new workers both in the factory and in the shops. Advise Out and About Limited whether these new members of staff should be employed part-time or full-time. Give reasons for your choice. So the new website is going to require more manpower. How am I going to staff it? Now, again, with this type of question, think about what is going to be the easier way for you to answer it. Now, based on the case study and the fact that I've got here, part-time jobs are popular with the workers and allow the company some flexibility. That's already 2 advantages they've given me for part-time employees. I don't even have to think about the answers for this. Popular with workers, allow the company some flexibility. So for me, they've almost made a decision for me. I'm going to go part-time, and my first one's going to be popular with workers. My second's going to be flexibility. And then immediately I've got to come up with a drawback myself. Okay, and the drawback, I suppose, is that you're going to need more of them. You know, if you have 5 full-time, you're going to need probably 10 part-time. So I'll put here more staff or more recruits needed. That's just my little note to myself. So part-time, popular with workers, flexibility, but more recruits needed. So now I've just got to write the answer. I've got it planned. So start off every 9 marker with your decision. I would recommend that Out and About Limited should employ part-time employees. Okay, so now the reasons why. So I'll start with if they did, this would give them flexibility as they would just employ the workers in the summer. Remember, the case study did tell us that. So going back to here, this is why it's so important to read the case study well. It says here, and allow the company some flexibility when camping sales are high in the summer. So clearly, they don't necessarily need those workers in the winter. So here I would say, as they would just employ the workers in the summer when they are busy. And here's a development of that point then. This would save them. So always using connectives, therefore this means because, as a result of, always using connectives to develop your points, this would save them an unnecessary Oh, sorry, bad spelling there. Unnecessary wages, thus reducing, oh sorry, thus keeping, not reducing, thus keeping profit levels high. Okay, now that's an answer in context, of course. It was in context anyway, but you can see here it does say that profits have been on the increase. So the fact that I'm then saying keeping profit levels high is clearly in context, because it shows that I've understood that they're a business currently making money. So if we look at my answers so far, I've said that they should employ part-time staff, as this would give them flexibility. There's that flexibility word, as they would just employ the workers in the summer when they are busy. This saves them on unnecessary wages, thus keeping profits high. So now I'm going to do for my second one, which was the popular with workers. Okay, so I'll then go another reason. There's that point again, guys, where I'm really signposting my arguments for and against. So I'm saying to him, another reason for. So another reason is that the part-time jobs are popular. We know that from the case study, which means it will be easy to recruit good staff. It's important I would put the word good, because probably you could get, even if they didn't do that, they could get someone to do the job. The fact that they have more people applying for the job because it's popular means they're going to have more choice, which means they can get that good staff. That's an important word to include there. And then I'll put here high quality staff will lead to increased customer satisfaction. Good staff equals satisfied customers. Will lead to increased customer satisfaction and thus increased sales. So says the theory. If you have good customer satisfaction, you're going to increase your sales. So there's my second argument for. Another reason is that the part-time jobs are popular, which means it'll be easy to recruit good staff, or I might change that word actually. If I was doing a perfect answer, I might put effective staff or highly competent staff. That good word is a bit vague, I suppose. Maybe I could have used a bit more technical language to have explained that. I suppose if I was rushing, I'd just write good, and I hope the examiner understands what I mean by that. High quality staff, that's better, isn't it? High quality staff will lead to increased customer satisfaction and thus increased sales. There's connectives, I'm saying will lead to, as a result of, thus. So there's connectives to develop your answers, to kind of drill down what are the benefits. Okay, now I need to do my drawback, which is more of them are needed. Okay, a downside, again, clearly signposting. So saying this is my drawback. A downside to this is that more people will need to be recruited to fill the hours. This will take time, which costs a business money. I don't think in this question, I think we can assume that the examiner understands why recruiting more people will take more time. It's obviously for the reason that you've got to do more interviews, more training, that type of thing. But I think we can assume, Jake, that they're going to know that they're going to be aware of that. So I don't think you need to waste the time saying this will take time because they have to do more interviews and they'll have to do more training. Just assume that they know that. So just say this will take time, which costs the business money. Okay, so I've now got my two advantages and my drawback, and I've used connectives to develop them. Even here, this will take time, which, there's my connective, costs a business money. So now I'm ready to do my final evaluative statement. Again, to get these 8th and 9th marks, the trickiest bit, I think, to do. So this is going to be what my critical reasoning will be. The company hopes to continue improving profits. That's the aim of the business at the moment. How do I know that? If we go back to here, it states here, profits have been on the increase, hopes to continue this. So hopes to continue this. So we know that that's their main aim, is to increase profits. So that's going to be my argument here. The company hopes to continue improving profits. That's my critical reasoning. And now, how do I justify my answer then? An increase in sales won't matter if costs go up as well. And so hiring part-time staff is better. Just going to hold fire. And so hiring part-time staff is better as it minimizes costs. Ultimately, and I'm just going to highlight that just to kind of say to you, this is my critical reasoning here. Their main target, as stated by the case study, is to continue improving profit. By recruiting part-time staff, they are more likely to achieve that because hiring the part-time staff will reduce or minimize their cost base, because they only have to hire the staff then in their busy summer months and don't have to have them kept on over the winter. Now, maybe I could write that, because I might write because they don't have to have the part-time staff kept on over the winter. But actually, I don't think that's necessary. I think the examiner, I think I've got enough evidence in there that I've understood that point without actually having to make it really, really clear. But if you were had a bit of time, I might be tempted to write something to the effect of, as staff would not need to be kept on in the winter if part-time. Although, as I say, I don't think I really need to do that. I think the point's been made. Okay, so that's our second 9-marker completed. When you're happy and you've made any notes that you feel you need to make, you're then ready to turn over and then read the final case study question. And it's the longest by quite some margin. Okay, so you can see in this case study that I've actually highlighted, even though it's a much bigger case study, I've actually highlighted less than I highlighted in the middle case study. But that middle case study was just jam-packed full of points that I felt were relevant. Whereas this one, I've highlighted the first bit, but just because it tells me what's unique about them. They're a high-quality, locally sourced coffee shop, so they use high-quality, locally sourced ingredients. As a result, they charge high prices. That's my second highlight. But they have some regular customers, probably because they are high quality. They've got a new competitor, clearly a riff on Starbucks, a made-up company called Starbean, and the fact that they're popular because they are firstly cheaper. Doesn't state they're cheaper, but we know they're cheaper from the fact that we know that coffee pot charge high prices, but also because they've got that brand recognition. And then the last paragraph, I could have highlighted the whole of that last paragraph, but I think as you'll see in the 9-mark question, it's all linked in with this anyway. So I don't really feel it was necessary to highlight this last one, as it's all pretty relevant actually for the last 9-marker. So let's turn over. Last 3 questions to do. So it's the shortest of all of 3 questions, this one. So we've got here an explain question once again. State, explain the 9 markers. That's about it with your business studies. And we've got here 4 marks. Now notice in this question, a bit sneaky, it says here, explain the benefits to the coffee pot of using high quality ingredients to the coffee pot. So we know this is a context question. We know that to get to the higher end, 3 to 4, it needs to be in context. We need to be talking about the case study. We need to be talking about the fact that this is a coffee shop near a castle and everything that goes with that. It says benefits there. That's a bit of a mislead, okay? Because you can with this question do one argument well developed in context. You don't need to have more than one. I know it says plural there. All they're saying is that there is more than one right answer to this question. Okay, so whether you did 2 or not would be down to you. You'll see how I approach it, and then I'll talk about afterwards why I approach it the way I approach it. Okay, so the coffee shop, sorry, the coffee pot. So this is going to be my first bit. Coffee pot benefits from using high quality ingredients. And I'll be honest with you, this answer is going to pretty much reuse the entirety of the case study to answer it for me, as it allows them to have a different product compared to Starbean. Starbean are clearly a branded chain. They are not using high quality ingredients, or at least if they're charging cheaper prices, we can infer that from the case study. This is important. There's my connective. So developing my point now. This is important as the coffee pot has seen falling sales since Starbean opened. So now we're definitely in context, definitely hitting those context points. Final point to develop then. So I'm still going with this thread of argument. By using this quality, more people would choose them rather than competitors, thus increasing profits and sales. It's their unique selling point. So what is the benefit of using high quality product ingredients? It's their unique selling point. So it's what makes them different to Starbean. Now this is important as the coffee pot has seen falling sales since Starbean opened. By using this quality, more people would choose them rather than competitors, thus increasing profits and sales. Now, I know the fact that they have struggled with that in comparison, but if they reverted to lower quality, that's not going to make their life any better. So for me, the fact that they are high quality does make them different, and thus that's the thing that is helping them to maintain their business at the moment. So you can see there, really, I didn't go for benefits. I really went for a singular benefit, but I developed it using the case study as context, making sure to then finally explain what would be the final outcome of that. And so we're going to move on to now 3B, which is unusual in that it has 5 marks against it and explain. Now, I can't really quite explain this question. I don't think I've ever seen a 5 marker before or after. Quite why the examiner chose 5 marks, I don't know. It's generally a 4 mark question, but clearly with an added weight of expectation of development. So if that comes up in the exam paper, a 5 marker, they're just expecting a greater weight of explanation, but it still would be approached like a 5 marker. Interestingly, when I looked at the the mark scheme, it's 3 to 5 marks in context. You might have thought it'd be 4 to 5, but it's not. So you would be stuck on 1 to 2 if you didn't have that context. That context up here, if you remember, I included by the fact that the coffee pot has seen falling sales. So how do I then approach this question? Explain how replacing the kitchen floor in order to meet health and safety standards will affect the coffee pot. Well, first and foremost, very obviously, the coffee pot will incur higher costs. That's just kind of a no-brainer start, really, surely. We know from the case study that it's going to cost £5,000 to replace this uneven floor. So that has to be the start. So the coffee pot will incur higher costs to meet the health and safety standards. Okay, now I could have with this question gone for a positive effect. Notice that. Doesn't have to be a negative effect. I went for negative effect just because I thought it would be easier to answer, and I straight away jumped on that £5,000. You could talk about positive effect though, because it means that customers might be happier to buy from there because they know they're going to get a product that's meeting health and safety standards, for example. Okay, but I've gone for the negative effect, which is the higher costs. So now I'm going to develop this response and then hopefully get it in context. This will, there's my connective, this will reduce the profitability of the business as the new floor will cost, I'm going to be specific here, £5,000 to be brought into line. To be brought in line, I'll just put it here with H&S standards, health and safety. The examiner knows what H&S means. It's a common acronym. Okay, now here's the context bit, because I know you're going to say, well, so you have got a bit of context there. Yeah, I've got a bit of context there, but I think I can do better than that. Okay, I also think I still don't think I've developed enough to get up to the 5 marks. So I think there's a bit more context, a bit more development to come yet. This is a problem for the coffee pot as they are currently experiencing falling sales. I'm just going to turn my sheet over here. Currently experiencing falling sales and must reduce costs to remain profitable. And that's it. So we can see there with this one that development was in the case study, based on the case study, this is a problem for as they are currently experiencing falling sales. Okay, let's just look at the case study. Where does it say about falling sales? So here has seen a significant drop in the coffee pot sales. So there's my development based on the case study. And thus my logic being they must reduce their costs to remain profitable. Replacing that floor for £5,000 is not going to reduce their costs. That is in context, well developed. I would say that it would be time to move on. So then we move to the last question of the paper, okay, which is the last 9 marker. You should be very comfortable now with the 9-mark process. Just a word of warning, not all 9 markers fit the pattern of make a choice, 2 arguments for, and a drawback. There have been, I would say probably over the last 5 years, maybe 6 9 markers that didn't quite fit that pattern. This paper, all 3 of them do. But you may find your paper does not fit the 9 marker. If that happens, I'll just go for 3 points in context well developed. So not 2 and 1 drawback, but just 3 points well developed. But this question does fit that pattern, so we can again use it. Because the question is saying, Helen is worried about the competition from the new Starbean coffee shop. She's found a suitable new location in the craft centre next to the castle. This location meets all health and safety standards. Advise Helen which location would be best for her business. Give reasons for your advice. Now, when I think about the case study and I think about all the challenges that she's got in her current location, I think it's a no-brainer to move to the new location. I think I can write a really good question for that. So I'd make my choice on the left-hand side in the margin here, in the new location, because I think actually the case study does it all for me. First reason, gets them away from Starbean, that competitor who's been taking sales away. Second benefit, don't have to pay £5,000. I haven't even thought about those answers myself. They've been given to me by the case study. Now my drawback, yeah, I have to think about that one a bit more. It does say that they've got some regular customers. So they're going to lose those regular customers because this new location is a few miles away. It does say it's a few miles away in the case study. Let me just show you that. Here is located next to the castle, and over here they're currently 3 miles away. So this is the new location 3 miles away, which means obviously they're going to lose those regular customers. So that's my drawback. Okay, so I'm ready to write my 9 marker. So start off with my decision. Always start with your decision. I think they should move to a new location. Okay, firstly, so there's my, I'm clearly labeling, I'm clearly signposting to the examiner. Here's my first argument. Firstly, this would mean, this would move them away from Starbean, who have caused a significant drop in sales. There's the context bit. I know who Starbean are, and I've picked up on the fact that they'll be causing them a significant drop in sales. Now, do I need to write anything more than that? I've mentioned the fact it gets them away from Starbean, and I've put in there my development, which is that they've caused them a significant drop in sales. I don't think I need to write anything more on that point, so I'm going to move forward. So my second point then is, secondly, again, there's my signposting to the examiner. Secondly, they would save £5,000. Here's my development as this is me developing now using the connective, as the new location presumably does not require a new floor. Clearly in context, because I'm referring to details from the case study, I've stated they would save £5,000 and I've explained how, or I've developed my answer to explain why they would save £5,000 as the new location presumably does not require a new floor. Again, I think that's my point developed and it's in context. So I'm going to move on now to my drawback. Lose regular customers. However, again, notice the language I'm using to signpost to the examiner that I'm now going into my drawback. However, they would lose their regular customers. And here's my development now, my connective, who have been willing to pay the higher prices charged by the coffee pot. I'm going to just add to this one. It might seem obvious, but I think I've got that. Given how concise I've been previously, I think I should have time to do this. I'll just add, there is no guarantee in the new location that customers would be willing to pay those prices. Their new customers would be willing to pay those prices. Okay, again, all in context, because that is about the fact that their current customers are willing to pay the extra money. Final connective on this could result in a significant fall in revenue. There's my connective. This could result, therefore, this means that as a result of, this could result in a significant fall in revenue. Okay, so there's now my 3 points, to, for, and against developed. So now the tricky bit, the bit that you guys need to attempt is that final critical evaluation. So let's have a think about what my argument would be. I think the biggest issue at the moment in her current location is that competitor, and that competitor is critical. The fact that in her new location she won't have competition, I think, is my critical reasoning. So this is how I'd attempt to write that. Moving to a new location is best, as although she'll lose her regulars, there will be many more new customers. Now here's my critical reasoning. Given the popular location next to the castle. That's my critical reasoning there. There'll be many more new customers given the popular location next to the castle. Where do I get that from? Look at the case study here. It says a craft centre has been open for a year and is becoming very popular with tourists. So I'm using that as a basis that the new customers she will get will outweigh my drawback. And then I'll finish up by saying without competition from Starbeam, customers will have to pay the higher prices. because that's essentially the problem at the moment, is that the competition from Start means people don't have to pay those higher prices like they used to. They've got an alternative. By going to her new location, they don't have an alternative, and so they will have to pay those higher prices. And thus, my argument of getting her away from Starbeam is outweighing that lose the regular customers, and it's outweighing it based on the fact that we're going to a new location that's very popular without competition. And that is the end of our paper. So I'm going to stop recording now.